Welcome to another episode of Cyrus's podcast. Today we have an amazing guest, Guy Gal, founder of Side Inc., Side Real Estate,
Side
the
real estate,
the
yeah.
the brokerage that doesn't exist. You know,
We call it the invisible brokerage.
the invisible brokerage. I love it, man. Hey, thank you so much for taking time today and being on the call today, Guy. I appreciate you. I'm stoked to have this. I know we've been planning it for a little while, so appreciate you, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I must say, the Cyrus podcast, it's a good name, but I like Cyrus Cast as well. Just dropping the pod a
Just
little bit. Drop the pod.
just to call it a Cyrus cast, huh?
Doesn't have to be a
Man,
pod. Yeah, man.
exactly. Yeah, I appreciate you. Hey, so I kind of want to jump in and talk about before, I want to go into a couple different things, but I want to talk before Side. I want to talk about actually maybe even going further back, but before Side, what did you do? Where you from? Talk to me a little bit.
Was there life before Side? I'm trying to remember. Side's in its seventh year now of existence. So it's still a relatively young company. Before Side, I had started and led a couple of other projects that turned into companies that did different things that were not at all real estate related. But what's interesting with my history is I've always just done my own thing. I've always built my own companies. I've always solved problems that seemed interesting to me. And I've been very fortunate now to have done that. I was very fortunate to have done that a bunch of different times in my 20s, and coming into my 30s, it had given me all the exposure and experience and insight that I needed to be able to make Side a lot more interesting and successful. And that's been its own learning and growing experience, of course, but there was a lot of foundation that allowed that to be as successful as it has been.
Yeah, so you said you've kind of always done your own thing, and what you wanted to do. Is that from childhood? Is that from like when did you start like just being like, I'm just going to do my own thing and focus in on what I want to do?
That's a great question because it's hard to pinpoint exactly that, but I think a big, if I look backwards now and I try to put an organized narrative around my own story and my own lived experience, I think it all starts with the fact that I have a funny name. That gets lost sometimes, right? but yeah, I have a 3-letter first name, 3-letter last name, and it's an oxymoron. It's Guy Gal. It's odd and weird and doesn't sound particularly real, to a point where I had to figure out how to optimize the internet so that when anybody searches Guy Gal, the first result is, yes, that is my real name. And interestingly enough, in high school, my bias and my first inclinations were to apply for jobs at McDonald's or, the local theme park or whoever it is that was accepting applications for entry-level positions. And I did just that. It wasn't like I was inherently entrepreneurial or disinterested in working as part of somebody else's company or team. It's just that I made all those applications and I never got any callbacks. And I think it's largely because of the funny name. If you're a hiring manager at McDonald's and you've got 100 applications for like 2 jobs, you're leafing through that like, oh, Guy Gal, very funny. Just crumple that up, and you move on to the next one. That was my working theory anyways. But I couldn't get work at all when I was in high school. And so I started figuring out my own work and figuring out how to make money without having someone actually employ me and give me the opportunity.
Oh, wow.
And that got the creative juices
That's so
flowing.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And so throughout high school, I ended up doing all sorts of I ended up seeing myself like doing all sorts of odds and ends kind of work, jobs, projects that enrich me in a way that working part-time for minimum wage likely would not have. And I learned a lot of interesting lessons. So it didn't just enrich me financially more than a part-time job. It taught me a whole lot of interesting things. 1 second here. It taught me a whole bunch of interesting things, and it exposed me to what's possible if you just set your mind to a thing and bring people around you that also are interested in that thing and collaborate and work together towards a common goal, a common cause.
So, and I'm just curious, what were like some of those, you're in high school, you're trying to figure it out, you're learning it's a very interesting thing because you know, that thought process of like, hey, like I guess I can't get hired, so I got to figure something else out, right? Like, and then so what were some of the first things that you like, one of the first businesses or entrepreneurial ventures that you took when you were in high school?
You know, one of the most, I'll just share one because there's several, but one of the ones that was most enriching, again, financially and just in terms of experience and exposure and learnings. I've always just been curious, I guess. I'm interested in how things work and why they work the way they do. And you know how on Mother's Days and Father's Days and Valentine's Days, things like that, you're driving up and down the road and there'll be people standing on the side selling bouquets of flowers. I
Yeah.
I just got interested in what the economics of that were, because I'm like, man, they work, you know, these people do this just like 6 times a year. What's interesting about that? Is there real money to be made here? What is the business of these casual roadside flower salespeople? Where are they getting this product from? Who is organizing them? Is it 1,000 individual like people, or is it a company that's organizing all these people to do this thing all at once? I got curious for whatever reason. It just was something I started wondering about, and I thought I could, if there was, I just, you know, do some random math where I'm like, okay, they're selling this for $30 a bouquet, and they're probably selling 100 of those today. So that's $3,000 for a day of work. What's the cost on it? How much are they clearing? That's how my head was working. And so in my head, I worked it out that this was pretty lucrative. I'm like, man, if you're one person and you're selling 100 bouquets and you're bringing in $3,000, the cost on that for the person that's working, let's just assume they're making 3 times minimum wage. Like, is this, and then the cost for this is that. Wow, somebody is pocketing like a $2,000 profit if my assumption for what the flowers cost is right. But I didn't know how much flowers really cost. So what I did was I went to a flower shop that was local to where I lived. And it was like, hey, is the owner here? And it was the person that was working the shop. Like, I have a question for you. Like, do you do this Mother's Day stuff? Like, what's the, is this something that florists do? Do people buy the flowers from you? And he was like, actually, I don't do it, but I'd love to do it. The way that other florists do this is they'll give like some kids or some young adults or whatever a bunch of their end of life flowers on consignment. So stuff that's going to be bad within the next few days or the next week is going to start wilting, not the freshest stuff. The end of line stuff, they give it up on consignment, and then the person is responsible for bringing them back a bunch of money from the sales, and they work it out that way. And that was a revelation to me. I'm like, what the hell is consignment? This is a thing that's actually possible. So that became one of the things that I did in high school. The first time around, it was like me and a friend on two corners, and we took in like $4,000 that day between the two of us, and $1,000 went to the florist, and we split 3,000. It was all cash, no taxes. Right? We were maybe 14 or 15. It felt like a small fortune. Like, yeah, we're gonna, yeah,
Yeah,
we're
you're
gonna,
balling at that age.
right? It's like, yeah, we're gonna do this again. And a year later on Mother's Day, we made $20,000 because we brought more of our friends in. So now we're paying some more costs out. All of a sudden, I'm starting to learn how you actually create a business. Now, this, mind you, is an illegal business, not paying taxes. But the basic mechanics of how you
Yeah,
grow,
exactly.
scale, and how cost works and how profits work. But that was the arrangement. And throughout high school, that operation just got bigger and bigger. Going out 3-4 times a year, to a point where I would take in, like, I was no longer working those doing that stuff myself, but I think my best year I made 22,000
Wow.
from like four events, like 4 days.
Yeah.
And I didn't have to work the corner. I just drove from one to the other, making sure everybody was replenished and supplied, and it was awesome. It was really fun. And then, of course, you move on from that kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, I'm not going to do this my whole life. This was just an interesting thing while it lasted.
Yeah, no, but that's a pretty interesting. In general, I was actually, it blew my mind right now when you were talking about how they use the end of life and the consignment. And I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense. Knowing business and knowing how that makes sense, that's how they do it. So
that's how you
pretty
can sell it.
interesting.
Yeah.
And so then, yeah,
it's how you
so
can
then
sell
you
a
get
bouquet that would be $100 for $30, right?
exactly, which is awesome. So then you get you're out of high school, you move on. You started a couple different companies, correct? Correct me if I'm wrong,
Yeah.
right? Before side, and had some success there, and then you said, I guess I'm going to get into the real estate game. Were you involved with real estate beforehand?
I wasn't, and I didn't have any intention to become involved in real estate either. It wasn't, the first few companies I started, it was by accident. It's like you just have an itch and you scratch it, and you realize that other people want to scratch too, and then you can go and help them. And next thing you know, there's money exchanging hands and a business being developed, and wow, all right, you're off to the races, and you're figuring things out as you go along. When I was younger, I wasn't overly deliberate about what it is that I allowed to catch my attention. I would just go with whatever it is that did. It wasn't deliberate. It was more like it happened to me. It was more accidental, but great. It exposed me to lots of interesting things. Side was a very different kind of thing, because I was coming off having exited the last company I had started, which had a minor exit to a larger company after a few years of us building and developing it. And I found myself in a position where, for the first time in my life, in my early 30s, I had enough money not to be paycheck to paycheck for a while. And that felt like it was buying me time to, for the first time, be deliberate about what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. My 20s were very exploratory. Like, I'll go with wherever the wind blows and do my best to glide on that. And then my 30s were, let's pick a thing that I want to commit myself to, that's life's work, that I really feel a great deal of conviction around, that I believe will be fulfilling and they'll give me purpose. And I did not think real estate was that. Quite the opposite. I was quite uninterested in real estate. It presented to me as something to stay away from, and we'll talk a little bit more about why. But in my early 30s, when I took the decision to take some time to figure out what was next, it was all about going out and finding an interesting problem to solve, and an interesting problem to solve for interesting people. And that was almost a 2-year process where I had the great privilege of not having to work to make ends meet, and could therefore just focus on ideation and exploration and figuring out what was next. A really tremendous privilege, and I took full advantage of it. And the end result of that was Side. Right? Now, and so it wasn't something that was top down. It wasn't, let's go out and do something in real estate. It was, let's go out and find a compelling problem. And it just so happened that after 10 months of looking, the problem that we found was one that was impacting top producing agents and teams. And Ed and I, one of my co-founders, we were so compelled by that, because in top producing agents, we didn't see realtors. What we saw were entrepreneurs who happened to choose real estate as for their career, but would have done well no matter what they had chosen, because they had that in them, right? And we felt that they were being largely underserved by the status quo and the industry setup as it was when nearly 7 years ago, and felt that we could create something entirely distinct and novel and one of a kind that had never been done before, but that was specifically being done to help a very specific segment of agent that we felt was ready for it and would really embrace it, because they were already behaving in that way. They just weren't able to express that behavior fully.
You're doing your research, you're trying to figure that out, so on and so forth. Your how did you find, like, were you involved? Did you know people in real estate, or how did you get in? Like, I'm curious on how real estate came up in general when you were doing your research.
My first experience with real estate was when my friends in my 20s, the ones that were always interested in the get rich quick schemes, and that always had 1,000 hustles going on at the same time, who were never interested in necessarily committing to a particular path, and were just kind of motivated by how to make financial gains as fast as possible. Those were the people that I knew that were getting licensed and were getting into real estate. And that was my experience and exposure to it. And so I had always had a relatively low opinion of real estate agents, because my understanding of what an agent was based on my friends who were not at all ever serious and should never have been involved in a real estate transaction, getting licensed and being involved in like 1, 2, or 3 or 4 deals a year. And that was just enough for them to skate by and make their ends meet, right?
Yeah.
I did not look at that with fondness at all whatsoever. And then when I was in my late 20s, I went through my first real estate transaction as a buyer, and I was represented by an agent that gave me the impression that they were incredibly experienced, but it turns out that they were just misrepresenting themselves, because they were showing me the office's experience, the listings the office had, the experience the office had, that other agents were. But of course, the biggest feature of a big box brokerage brand, if you're a new agent, you get to pretend like you're really experienced, because you can talk about the office's experiences. You can talk about the listings from the office and pass them off as your own. That's all legal. That's allowed. And in fact, that's encouraged by traditional brokerages. So I felt prey to that. I fell prey to an agent who was very inexperienced that I thought was very experienced. And the end result of that transaction cost me over $1 million, and it was incredibly painful. And it was like all the money I had ever managed to make disappeared on me overnight, and I was back to negative. And I, in my 30s, after that experience, was like, I'm never buying a house again. Like, this is all so crazy. I can't believe this is legal and allowed to happen. That was my principal exposure to everything real estate. And what happened to change that was that 8 months into that 2-year period where I was alongside of Ed and then later Hillary trying to figure out what to do next and what to do with my life and what to commit myself to, I came to Ed's credit, he was always very interested in real estate, but we each had veto power. And I was like, nope, veto, not interested. Next. But 8 months in, sometimes you have to learn for yourself. I found myself helping my parents through some transaction that they were doing back home. And the agent that we were working with was a friend of mine, one of my close friends from high school who had become an agent, but that actually became an agent reluctantly. Like, that's not where they started. Which was interesting. So I was in my hometown, visiting my parents, catching up with that friend as they were closing that transaction. And I was involved in it and was telling the guy, hey, you like this transaction compared to the previous one that I was exposed to, night and day. Like, it's so much different, better, organized, thoughtful, all of the above. He was at a different brokerage, Sotheby's. The first agent was from Coldwell. So I was like, Sotheby's is such a better company than Coldwell. It did such a better job for and created a much better experience than Coldwell did. And I just saw him roll his eyes. Like, what? Why are you rolling your eyes? It's like, what do you mean? Like, what's the problem with me saying that? He's like, Sotheby's had nothing to do with your experience, and Coldwell had nothing to do with your experience. It's me, it's the agent that creates the experience. But all of my clients always give all the credit to the brokerage. They just assume that it's Sotheby's that did a great job for them, not me, the person who actually did. And so that person you worked with many years ago, that's who didn't do a good job. It wasn't the brokerage, it was that person. But they were really experienced. He's like, I bet you they weren't. He looked them up. He's like, yeah, they're a part-time agent. They just did to you what part-time agents do to me at my brokerage all the time, which is they go into listing appointments and they show my listings to compete against me because we're on the same brand.
Yeah.
And so I hate it because my brokerage competes against me. My clients give them the credit. And here I am carrying all the risk. I am putting in all the time. I'm the one who really cares. And it just feels like I constantly get the short end of the stick every single time. I'm undermined at every turn. It's as if this industry doesn't want there to be top producers. It's as if they, only want these part-time types. And so I was like, why did you even get into real estate? It's such a stupid industry. It's like, all of our idiot friends are agents. And he's like, Guy, that's why I got into it, because I did a transaction with one of our idiot friends and I saw how much money I paid them to be awful. And I was like, I could do this. I should do this.
Classic.
And I had all these marketing skills and, that was my background. And so I made a great website and all of that. And now I'm doing 70 transactions a year and over $1 million in gross commission income. And I never thought that was possible. I'm like, wow, you're making over $1 million a year. He's like, well, not exactly. A lot of money comes out of that. I'm paying Sotheby's $250,000 out of it. So like when all said and done, I'm clearing maybe 300. But he's like, one day I will start my own. I'll start my own company. I won't have these issues anymore. One of these days. And my thing to him was, well, why not now? What's holding you back from doing this particular moment? You're doing great. You're in your early 30s. You have the lowest risk profile you'll ever have. I'm an enabler for entrepreneurship. I'm just trying to push people off a cliff, right? Like, It's not so scary. You can fly. You can do this without your hand being held or training wheels or instructions. You're creative. You're resourceful. You're an entrepreneur. And his
Yeah.
response was, "It's way harder than you think. I'm going to have to start a brokerage. That's a different business. I'm in the hospitality business. I'm in service. I'm in sales. I'm not in administrative. I'm not, in clerical. I don't want to deal with legal. I don't want to worry about that. It's a huge distraction. I already spend too much time in transaction. I want to spend less time, not more. This will take me away from the production I'm doing. I don't want to compromise it." And I, being naive, was like, that all sounds like excuses. You're making excuses. That's all I'm hearing is excuses. You can do this. If other people can do it, you can do it. He's like, okay. And I went back to San Francisco, and he went back. He went back to business and started working on launching and starting his own brokerage. And a few months later, when we caught up, he was like, "I'm giving up. I'm not going to go through with it because I'm not naive. I just went out, did all this work. I spent time, I spent money. And when all was said and done, what I told you months ago is still the case. It's a huge distraction. It's a different business. I don't want this. I want to own my own business. I don't want to operate my own brokerage." And that's when my light bulb finally went off after 10, months of ideation. And
You're like, ding.
I was like, "Wait, say that again." He's like, "I want to own my business. I don't want to operate a brokerage." And he's like, I feel like I already operate a business. I just don't own it. And I don't know how I'll ever be able to. And I was like, "Isn't there something out there that's like white label brokerage as a service, like
Yeah.
Shopify brokerage, like invisible brokerage?" I mean, there must be, that must exist. He's like, "It doesn't exist. I've looked, nothing like that exists. If that existed, it would solve my problems. I'd be all over it." Like, and I mean, you'd pay for that? You would use that? He's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "How many agents out there are like you who would have this aspiration?" He said, "Anyone who's experienced, who's in the come up, right? Who's established, who has nowhere left to go in real estate. This is what they aspire to do eventually. They just never get around to it because there are so many
Yeah.
barriers, right?" And so that was in late 2015.
Yeah.
That just lit me up. I'm like, "Man, this is interesting. You're not even an agent. You're an entrepreneur. You just happen to be in real estate. Maybe we could create a one-of-a-kind, first of its kind brokerage, which is not a brokerage brand, but a brokerage platform. Invisible, white label, back office, infrastructure. Like, we're there taking care of all the legal and compliance, but you get to focus on what you do best. Right? Hospitality, service, sales, culture, team, growth." Amazing. From that point, it was about 8 more months of meeting with as many agents as would let us feed them lunch and getting feedback on whether or not what we were thinking about doing was a good idea or just some silly hallucination. And by the end of that process, by June of 2016, we had all this conviction that this is something that really deserved and needed to exist. And so the rest of 2016, we got our ducks in a row. We brought on Hillary as our third co-founder, who's a great real estate brain and could bring all that knowledge to the company and round us out as a founding team. And January of 17, Side became Side. Side launched and started working in that particular way. And in the last nearly 7 years, we have really accelerated the team trend in industry, and we've invented a brand new category that never existed before, and we've helped over 600 people create companies that did not exist before. And that's been the other interesting byproduct of Side is whenever you do something new, it'll get used in ways you never anticipated, right? And one of the ways Side's been utilized is by independents who already made, as you can relate to the leap. The leap is hard. You made it yourself, going independent. Who have already made that leap, are already operating on their own, but now can turn the reins over to Side and say, "You take care of back office. I'm going to turn all of my time and attention to growth." And so we have dozens of partners today who are who come from independence, but the majority remain teams that were inside of somebody else's business who now have created a brand new boutique that's all their own, where they have the upside of ownership, but no downside of operating brokerage.
Yeah, it's an amazing business model. It's an amazing product. And from seeing what you guys do and where you guys are going, it's inspiring, I think, for just in general for entrepreneurs, right? Like to know that sometimes people are like, well, they always say solve a problem, solve a problem, right? And it's like sometimes people are like, well, I don't know, there's no problems to solve. But when you realize, when you really look, there's always a problem to solve. It just depends on where it is, right? And like I
Yeah,
think that you totally and it comes from you being open to hearing the problems in other industries, even when the industry was the industry that you had no intention of being part of.
exactly. When you orient yourself to the problem and to the people it affects, everything, all your misconceptions become moot. You're able to eliminate a lot of your bias because
Yep.
you're thinking about things more holistically and objectively, which is good. It's a good thing. And if I may, there's actually telltale signs of that, of how to know when it's a problem or not, or
Yeah.
whatever, that are very easy to put in your head and keep in your mind. Because the best way to notice problems is passively, not actively look, but passively notice when something is happening to you that you don't, that's presenting as a problem, right? And so it's always good to have your mind set to that problem noticing mode in life in general. Just life in general, because if you go looking for problems actively, you will find them, and most of the time they won't be real, or they won't be as pronounced or as big or as meaningful, or you'll become someone who thinks of a solution and then searches for problems, right? When you actively look. So the way to do it is to truly be passive. And then it's about noticing. And how do you notice? Well, what you look for are visible signs of frustration and visible signs of annoyance. That's the first level of noticing a problem. It's when you yourself are finding yourself to be really frustrated and annoyed with one particular thing. Just stop and say, okay, why is this a problem for me right now? Like, what is affecting me? Why is this affecting me? What's affecting me? And then you can think about whether or not it's a big problem or a meaningful problem or an interesting problem second, right? But the first thing to do is to notice it. Sometimes it's the best problems don't come from the ones you experience yourself. I didn't experience the problem of side myself, right? But because I was looking for signs of frustration and anger in others, when that friend of mine was like, "Oh, you're giving Sotheby's credit, what the hell?" I was like, "Tell me more."
Tell me why that's an issue.
It got me curious. Like, why does that bother you? What hurts? And in noticing that and asking about it, it opened up a whole world that I had a complete misconception about, right? That in part I did understand accurately because, hey, 70% of transactions today in our industry right now, every year, are being closed by part-time agents, which is actually the greatest risk to the industry and what undermines top producers and professionalisms and integrity and the public good more than anything else in the industry does, period. It's like a slow cancer, but it satisfies the interest of the legacy brokerages because part-time agents pay a lot more per transaction than full-time ones. And so they want more deals being done by them. So in that way, my understanding of the industry was quite accurate and was born out of my own experience, but it wasn't nuanced. I didn't understand that 30% of deals and closings are being handled by great agents who are also very frustrated that 70% are being done by people that shouldn't be licensed. Right? And understanding that really created the mission for Side, because the mission was like, hey, let's go out there and make sure 70% of transactions are being done by these agents, these great people. That's our mission. Let's go out and in service of that mission, turn them into their own companies, help them differentiate, brand, package, distribute better, right?
Yeah.
Enable them.
And empower them ultimately, right?
Exactly. But that all came from just noticing the problem. So that's the way to do that. Look for signs of frustration and signs of anger in yourself and others, and ask them about it and see. And then the next order questions are, is this a big problem, a valuable problem? Is it worth solving? Is it not? Is it a first world problem? Is it a hair on fire, I need a painkiller problem? Or is it like a nice to have vitamin,
Yeah.
long-term health benefit problem, right? There's lots of texture to that, but the most important part is just making sure that it's a real one. It's a real problem that's actually affecting someone.
I love that. And I thank you for breaking that down, because I think that's going to be very valuable for a lot of people. You know, the majority of listeners are entrepreneurs in general, right? So we have a lot of people that are real estate professionals, but we also have a lot of people that are just interested in learning about business and success. And so that's super helpful for there's probably someone on here that's listening and trying to figure out, oh, what do I do next? And knowing that you were in that position only 7-8 years ago, and now building one of the top brokerages in the country, and being wildly successful. What's the valuation of Side now?
It's $2.5 billion.
Oh, that's it. Just billion with a B, huh?
It's a lot. It's a lot. It's certainly a lot, and it's presented us with lots of opportunity. And of course, one of the things, since this is an entrepreneur podcast, I want to make sure I don't lose the nuance. Your valuation, the valuation that your company has, is never your present valuation. It's always your future one. Side is a company that's raised venture capital. Not every company, every business, in fact, the vast majority of companies and businesses should not raise venture capital. It's only very specific kinds of companies that should, with very specific objectives and plans and path towards particular outcomes that should. I'll spare you the details on that today. We can maybe do this another time. But Site is a venture-backed company, and so when we raise money, the valuation the company receives is not the valuation of the company at the time in which it raises the money. It's the valuation of what the company and investors that are investing believe the company will be at when they finish investing the new capital that they're taking in. So it's a very common misconception that if the company was valued at $1 billion in its last financing, it's worth $1 billion that day. It's not. It's probably worth 30 to 50% of that, right? Something like that. But now it's taking on $100 million in new capital to invest. And by the time it deploys all of it and uses it to generate more revenue and grow the company even more, the company should then be valued at that valuation that it signed up for. You're signing up for it.
Yeah, 100%.
And then if you're raising more capital, that new valuation is your next milestone. It's what you're working for. It's what you're investing towards accomplishing next. So yes, Side raised $200 million, took a $2.5 billion valuation. We've invested roughly half of that over the last year and a half or two since we've raised that capital. We're growing sustainably and well. We have very healthy gross margins. We're relatively low burn. We're still burning, meaning we're still investing in growth. There's still so much growth to be had. But it's a very particular kind of build. Most entrepreneurs and company builders should not raise venture capital. It's unless they're building a company that's going to try to become venture size, and they have all of that worked out on paper up front.
Yeah. So now, speaking of, I appreciate you for breaking that down. Now, speaking of growth and growth inside, and where you guys are looking and what you guys are doing, what's next for Side? What's next for Guy?
Okay, I'll answer that, but first I want to share one thing.
Yeah.
For those two things. For those of you listening to this that are entrepreneurs that are not in real estate, the cheat sheet is you get a book, you buy a book called 4 Steps to the Epiphany. It's a book by Steve Blank. He is a Stanford professor, and he wrote the Bible on the right process by which to identify a great problem and how to then figure out the right solution and bring that to market as a company, right? So if you're an entrepreneur outside of real estate, it's great reading, and especially if you're looking to do something venture-backed, it's super helpful, give you lots of details. If you're in real estate, my number one piece of advice is don't be enticed by, and if you're in real estate and successful in real estate, you're doing, $500,000 plus GCI a year, $1 million plus GCI a year, you've already figured out the hardest part, which is going from 0 to 1, something that doesn't exist and is not working to something that is working. That's the hardest part. It's way easier to go from 1 to 100 than to go to 0 to 1. So if you've already figured out 0 to 1, your greatest opportunity is not to go back to 0 again because you're bored or you're jaded or you're disillusioned or you had a bad year because the market sucks. It's to actually lean into going from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, because you'll be able to make that progress much faster and better. And that growth is what makes the work exciting and interesting and keeps you challenged and engaged and enthusiastic. So with that, I'll answer your question. I am still challenged, engaged, and enthusiastic. My philosophy on life is so long as I'm learning and growing, I know that what I'm doing is the right thing to be doing. And I continue to, nearly 7 years into Side, every day, every week, every month, every year, feel like I am becoming that much of a smarter, more capable, more able person, a kinder, gentler, more complete individual, a better friend and colleague and peer and professional. And I love that. I love that personal, professional progression. That's what is so addicting to me. And I love enabling and helping others. And so Side continues to do that, right? Every week, every month, there are new companies that we're helping go live for the first time. There are existing independents who we're helping maintain their independence and gain sophistication and leverage so they can grow and thrive and not just scrape by. So all those buttons get pushed all the time: growth, learning, helping, serving, succeeding through the success of others. I love it. I'm so glad that I spent 2 years finding my 20 years of life work. So there's still a whole lot ahead.
Love that.
Yeah, for me personally, media, business is a medium to establish wonderful relationships with wonderful people. A big part of my wealth is that I, get to know someone like you and get to be able to talk to you and share ideas and time and energy, get to vicariously experience the amazing success you had, right? Not just in your real estate career, but in your speaking and your teaching and your mentoring and your coaching. It's incredible. It's, it's like wells me up right now, even as I speak about it. Like I really
Thank
do.
you.
I feel it deeply, and I have a deep sense of gratitude. I get to be a part of it at all. Right? Like, wow, how did I get to be a part of this? It never feels like my thing. It feels like I get to be a part of lots of other people's thing because of the one thing I did, my thing that I did. So I've got my blinders on, and so does Side. Our vision is 20 years long, and we're 7 years into it. And the end result of that vision is that the vast majority of transactions will be facilitated by great agents who are experienced, not part-timers, and that instead of there being 5 national brokerage conglomerates that are these faceless corporations based in the middle of nowhere in New Jersey or whatever the case, and have 2 million agents subservient to them, of whom maybe 100 or 200,000 are very experienced but are constantly undermined. What I want to see, what Sai wants to see at the end of all this, is an industry where the vast majority of transactions are done by professionals, by folks like you, by people that you teach and that you mentor and that you bring up in the industry, that know how to do things the right way. And that instead of you being owned by someone else, because at some point, eventually your independent gets pressured into that by the next company that comes into town with money to spend, right? And commissions to subsidize. Instead of that, that we have an industry where there are thousands of brokerages that are owned by the people who actually create the value in the first place for the client, that serve the community, that they're the ones that are capturing that, not just the money, not just that value, but the equity, the actual equity value of those assets. And so that's the vision for us. We're about 700 companies into that now. There are several thousands more that we'd like to create and help sustain here in the coming years. And of course, the really distinct and interesting part of that is that traditionally being independent means being alone and disconnected. You get to be different, but you're also by yourself. And traditionally, with traditional brokerages have had an appeal to folks who would otherwise be independent, is, hey, here you get to be together, and together is great. It's amazing to be together, but the cost of being together is being the same. Right? That's the entry cost of being together. You've got to all be the same. You got to have the same colors and pitch and whatnot, right? What's beautiful about the side community and the network is that you get to be different, but together. It's really the best of both worlds. You get to be Keystone, but you also get to have a dynamic and wonderful relationship with Heather Stevens in Dallas at Select, right?
100%.
And you can collaborate and share and learn from each other, and be on the same side as one another, and refer to deals back and forth and not be isolated. And so that's the future side's going to continue to help create thousands of local boutiques, regional boutiques that are owned by the folks who actually create the value, whose brokerage back office is operated by us, and who are networked and connected and together in one vibrant community of owners and experienced agents that are part of those companies.
I love that. You had said something earlier, and you were talking about how you are able to be part of all of these other people's journeys. And it's something that I'm like, it's like one of my obsessions and like one of my like actual reasons for or definition of success is like how many people I can positively impact on a daily basis. And that's like that. I'm like obsessed with butterflies, you know, and that's why it's called the butterfly effect, you know. So it's like,
that explains the butterflies.
If I can make, yeah, exactly. So if I can make a small little change here, if I can make a positive impact on somebody else's life now, you know, they may be able to change other people. And with what you're doing with Side and what you've done is you've been able to empower all of these individuals all across the country to build their own brokerages, which is essentially changing their whole legacy. You know, the coolest thing to me, like when I'm coaching, when I'm mentoring, when I'm doing any of this, it's like consulting, even it's like at the end of the day, like the coolest thing to me is how we're able to take somebody, right, change their complete path of life. Yes. And it's not just their path, it's their generations and generations of change. It's an amazing thing. So I appreciate that. Amazing thing.
Great agents don't just help people buy and sell houses. They create more great agents. They change lives of clients and their colleagues and peers, and they build community. You know, they build and they facilitate community. And when
100%.
Yeah, and when you're an owner and in your boutique, your incentive is to also reinvest back into that community, and your profits stay in the community. They get reinvested back in the community. They're not extracted, you know, from like Huntington Beach to Jersey Shore, right? That's not where the money ends up. It ends up right back where you're living, where you're serving. And it just lifts all the boats. That tide, it lifts all the boats. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it's amazing. You've built an amazing company with an amazing team and amazing agents all across the country. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you sharing your story and everything. I think it's going to be super helpful for everybody. Thank you so much, Guy. One last question. If people want to get a hold of you, if they want to connect with you, if they want to see what you're doing, what's the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, I'm not too active on the socials as much nowadays. So the best place to connect with me is, I would say, is LinkedIn. It's really easy to find me everywhere. Just go into Google and type in Guy Gal, and the first result will say, yes, that is my real name.
Awesome. Thank you, Guy. Thank you so much. I appreciate you and appreciate your time.
Thank you, Cyrus. I appreciate you. Talk to you soon. Bye, Al.